Welcome back to the Coffee Hour. I'm Andy Bates.
I'm Sarah Golseth.
Our guest today, the Reverend Delwyn Campbell, is pastor of St. John Lutheran Church in Gary, Indiana, and domestic missionary, which is a term we don't hear very often. We were just talking about missionaries a little bit ago, and he is, I think, our last remaining domestic missionary. Pastor Campbell, welcome back to the Coffee Hour.
Good morning, everybody. I trust you've got your favorite caffeinated beverage with you as we sit down.
Now, the folks in St. Louis maybe don't get to hear your voice very often, but you're on the radio from time to time. I know at one time you had a radio program in the Chicagoland area. Are you still on the air?
As a matter of fact, I just came off of that program. It was 5 days a week, 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. and then 12 to 1 p.m. And one day I started sneezing after the 9 o'clock show, and the general manager, who was my co-host of the Morning Drive talk show, said, "You need to go get checked out." So I go, I get tested, I come up negative, and she's still not satisfied. Well, unfortunately for her, I had 3 days not having to wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning. 3 days of not having to spend my entire morning at the radio station. And I discovered that the sky didn't fall and the earth didn't open up. And I actually had time to do my other job activities in a more relaxed manner. And so after I got through visiting with the doctor, and now I've got a negative test result and the doctor says I'm fine, I actually called the station owner and said, I think that I don't want to come back. And the other thing about it was, while it was good being on a morning drive talk radio show, I mean, there was a time in my life when that was my dream, morning drive talk radio. But now, I came to Gary to develop the mission of the LCMS here in Gary, Indiana, not to be a media personality. And there were people who recognized me on the street as Del Campbell from the Breakfast Club, rather than Reverend Delwyn Campbell, LCMS missionary. And so I felt like, for the good of the overall mission, I needed to make an adjustment. I still may go back and do a show that allows me to speak even more freely about confessional evangelical things, because that was another issue with me. There were too many times when something would be said and I would correct it, and then I would be told, well, we're not talking about religious things. And because she was the general manager, I had to submit to authority and let that go. When deep down inside, I want to say, no, you said this was wrong. This is not the way Lutherans think. Therefore, you cannot ascribe this to every church in Gary, because there are 2 churches in Gary that do not operate this way, that do not think this way. So, but we're still in good. We have great relationship. In fact, the owner of the station said, well, can you come back and work in sales? I said, I've never really liked being a radio salesperson. I always liked production and on air much more. So we're going to see about getting some sponsorship and getting a show that, like the first show I had with that station, was all about 2 kingdoms and the 3 estates and law and gospel in a local setting. So we're going to do that.
That's very cool.
Yeah. Unless, of course, the Lord has something else in mind.
Can you describe Gary, Indiana, for people who aren't familiar with that community?
Sure. And in a sense, it's like 2 things to describe. On the one hand, you've got the area, Northwest Indiana, which existed before there was a Gary. Because, in fact, St. John's Lutheran Church had its start in 1870. Gary, Indiana didn't have its start until 1906. If you've ever seen The Music Man, and you remember that guy singing that song or talking about the Gary Music Conservatory class of 1905, And, everyone else being duped by that because, of course, there was no Gary Music Conservatory class of 1905 because it did not exist. But St. John's has been in existence since 1870. In 1906, U.S. Steel built its steel mill and planted a city, which it called Gary. And in 1910, Gary annexed Tolliston, which was where St. John's was located. Originally, St. John's was a German congregation. Originally, Gary, Indiana was designed such that basically every ethnic group had its own area. And so all the African Americans lived in Midtown. In the earlier days, there was not a large African American population. There, of course, was not a large African American Lutheran population. There were no African American Lutheran churches. That held true until 1949 with the planting of Good Shepherd Lutheran Church by Trinity Lutheran Church with a couple, the Bodley family, who had moved up, I believe it was from Alabama, and were looking for a church home. And Trinity Lutheran Church said, well, tell you what, all the black folks in Gary live in Midtown. We'll plant a church in Midtown. That way you don't have to travel all the way to 7th in Massachusetts to worship the Lord in spirit and in truth. And so they did. They planted Good Shepherd. Now, during this time, St. John's was still operating as a German church. But as Gary began to integrate, as the strict rules about where blacks could live were removed, and blacks began to move out of Midtown into other areas like Tolliston and Ambridge, there was a pastor, Norman Brandt, who is now with the Lord. His wife is still alive with us today. Well, he began actively drawing people from Tolliston, from Ambridge, African Americans, and bringing them to St. John's. He even went so far as to adopt a couple children. So, and he was also a member of the local branch of the NAACP. So he was actively involved in the civil rights movement. And St. John's became, over time, an African American congregation. Also, over time, the members of St. John grew older. That happens in life. People get older. As is the case with many families in Gary, many of their children moved out of the city. And so St. John's grew smaller. And it finally reached a point around in 2015 that members of the congregation reached out to LCMS Black Ministries and LCMS Indiana District requesting assistance in getting a pastor, because they felt that if they didn't have a pastor, they were not going to survive much longer. The Indiana District contacted Mission Field USA, part of LCMS Office of National Mission, and they deployed me as a strategic mission developer. And as a matter of fact, that's what my call documents say, strategic mission developer. But of course, the people of St. John's were just happy to have somebody to provide pastoral care. And as far as they was concerned, my title was pastor. And so now we've been here 5 years. In that time period, while we were at St. John's, while we were working on planting a school, Ascension Lutheran Christian School, in partnership with Lumen, which operates out of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, the pastoral situation at Good Shepherd changed. The pastor of Good Shepherd at that time resigned from the LCMS. And so the members of Good Shepherd asked me would I provide pastoral care for them as well. I agreed to do so, but I did it with them on a different situation. Whereas St. John's, part of the agreement was they would pay me pulpit supply for my service to them. I asked Good Shepherd, instead of doing that, why don't you become a Together in Ministry partner? Which they were happy to do. And they filled out the paperwork and took the pledge. And so now Good Shepherd is one of my many mission partners. Praise God. And so I serve the two congregations, plus doing chapel support for Ascension Lutheran Christian School. My goal, and in fact, this year, in 10 days, I'm meeting with the presidents of the boards of Good Shepherd, St. John's, and Ascension to talk how we can even more closely align our work so that we are mutually supportive. Because up to now, the churches have been supporting the school, but the churches and the school have not actually been working together, where the school population comes and visits the churches or does things at the churches. And I want to change that, because I think we will either all walk together or we will all hang separately, to paraphrase Benjamin Franklin. And so that's my goal for this year. And in addition, we've developed over these past 5 years partnerships with other Lutheran congregations, both in the state of Indiana and outside the state of Indiana, where they come up here on short mission trips to assist us in community development activities. We've got a group wanting to come up from Indianapolis to do some work with some of our senior citizens. There's a lot of people who stayed here in Gary, who did not leave. They own their homes. They've gotten older. Their homes have gotten older, and they're not able to keep them up. And no, some of these families are not LCMS families. But I do believe that if we can show the Gary community that the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod does care about Gary, because Jesus cares about Gary, and that the growth and health and development of Gary is important to us. That's why we sent a strategic mission developer to Gary, Indiana. We don't have a strategic mission developer in any other cities in the United States. And we haven't done. Go ahead.
How can we're just about out of time.
Yeah,
How can we learn more about the Lord's work at St. John and Good Shepherd and Ascension Lutheran Christian School in Gary?
All three places have Facebook pages: Central Lutheran Christian School, St. John's Evangelical Lutheran Church, Good Shepherd Lutheran Church. Each one of them has a Facebook page. I invite you all to link up with them. They each have post their sermons from the previous Sunday, so you can hear what I preached at each church or at the churches. Ascension does post the chapel services, not all the time, but most of the time. So you can see that as well, along with other postings about what the kids are doing. So you can do it that way. Also, you can check out the LCMS page, lcms.org/Campbell, just like the soup. That way you'll get a chance to see what's going on with me and the family. And, of course, prayerfully support the mission.
Our guest today, the Reverend Delwyn Campbell, pastor of St. John Evangelical Lutheran Church in Gary, Indiana, strategic mission developer for Gary, Indiana. Thank you so much, Pastor Campbell, for the update and spending some time with us on the Coffee Hour.
Glad to. Now let me get my last sip in.
You've been listening to the Coffee Hour. I'm Andy Bates.
I'm Sarah Gulseth.
The Coffee Hour with Andy and Sarah is a production of KFUO. To support the Coffee Hour and KFUO Radio, visit KFUO.org. You can also text KFUO to 41444 or send an email to gifts@KFUO.org. And you can call us at 800-844-0524. KFUO. Christ for you, anytime, anywhere.